normally we like these to be very practical, something that you can take back real quick. Hansard's done a good job of that. Hers will come in, she'll do 15 minutes, boom, a tool you can take and use that day. Of course, Neely's stuff on ChatGPT, Kelsey's on Canva, they've all been good stuff. Because a lot of this is technological in nature, we have to revisit that, which is good because we've got like an endless supply of stuff to come back to. This one is a little different. This is more theoretical, which is outside of what we typically are comfortable doing, but it's so foundational to our philosophy at our school and the way we approach grading. We do it like nobody else does. For a number of years, the whole district did this. Now, Rossville Middle School is the school that does it. Like we're the standards-based grading school in our district, and they do that because when Hannah Knofel and some other teachers went and advocated for us when they were revisiting this at the district level, and they're like, what we do is effective and we like it, and they allowed us to keep it. They really do a good job at leaving us be to do what we want to do, and we're thankful for that. But we don't do what we want to do just because it's cute or because it's edgy. We do what we do because, as I've said 100 times before, everything that's worth doing is an extension of good parenthood, right? I mean, I believe in standards-based grading because just in my own world, I've got 4 children, and they're all 4 different, right? You've got 2, they're different people. Yeah. And the way that I interact with Ella is different than the way I interact with Piper because that's appropriate for them. You have to engage them in ways consistent with their nature. So that's the basis for why we do that ultimately, foundationally. And it's the basis for why we do everything we do, whether it be, cleaning our facilities, feeding kids, the way we interact with them in our classrooms, the way we try to inspire them. We're trying to be good parents. So because of that, I have to say that it's not perfect. There's nothing perfect about it, and perfection is not the standard. Never has been the standard. The standard is teachability, and if you're trying to execute something, but it's in the interest of being a good parent, and you do it in an imperfect way, it's okay. Don't overthink it. Just be a good parent. You don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I'm not saying don't strive to be better and better, but be really, really good at what you do. Ultimately, you want to inspire and touch hearts, and that's what we're about. And I think standards-based grading removes a lot of things that would naturally get in the way of that, and we'll see why. This is preaching to the choir for a lot of you. Dimlich, I don't know if we've ever had a time to sit down with you specifically and go over this in detail. I know you had like a little introductory crash course in it, so
right.
This will be more along those lines. Again, okay. We're not going to talk a lot of mechanics, not a lot of like motivation strategies. We could do a whole session just on that. This is why we do what we do. What's the basis of it, okay? So we'll talk about the purpose of assessment, common defects, and traditional practices. I call this forensic. When you hear me say forensic assessment, know that I'm talking about standards-based grading, all right? You think about the courtroom analogy. You have advocates that are presenting evidence to the lawyer or to a jury, and they make the determination of guilt or innocence, right? And in the classroom, students are their advocates, and they're presenting evidence to you, the content expert. And you, based upon your authority, you make that determination on whether they're, what their level of content mastery is. So you are the determining factor in that. So I like that term forensic. Not a lot of people use that. I might be the only one, but that's okay. Just know when I say that, I'm talking about standards-based grading as opposed to a traditional assignments-based approach to instruction that is commonplace in most schools. And again, let me also say, that's okay. I mean, good teaching is still good teaching. It doesn't matter what assessment model that you use. A person can use traditional assessment practices and still be an excellent teacher. A person can use standards-based grading and be a terrible teacher. Good teaching is good teaching. What we're trying to do is think critically about what we do and why we do it. And if you do it, if you contextualize what you do and do it well with that intent and purpose, then standards-based grading is only going to assist you. It can't hurt you. In fact, it can remove a lot of potential stumbling blocks for you and make your practices better. But we have to, public education is better than it's ever been. I believe that. It's not perfect because perfection is not the standard, but we need to question critically what we do. Teachers are good, but we don't often sit and think about, man, why am I using the model of assessment that I'm using? Why am I using the assessment tool I'm using? Why am I using this particular instructional practice? A lot of it is just because we have a manner about us, or we have a certain innate knowledge about, like I allude to Tony sometimes. Tony's got a brand. He's got a veneer about him. It's not anything he learned in school. I mean, may have been, but he's just got his way, and it works. It's not anything that you can put your finger on He's got, that's part of his mystique in building a relationship with kids. We can sit here and analyze what he does and try to package it and sell it, but it may not work for Tina, you know, because Tony pulls it off because that's who he is. I had my veneer, Hansard has her thing, you know, you got your style and all that. So, but when it comes to assessment, we're talking about like feedback, like how we give feedback and what studies have shown is effective in the way we do with feedback, or what we do with feedback. So remember, let's be deliberate about what we do. And that comes down to knowing what we're doing, right? What is the purpose of assessment? Like, why do we assess? What is the purpose?
To gauge where students are.
To gauge where students are and to let them know, right?
Yeah,
To communicate. It's
right.
feedback.
Right.
Assessment is feedback. That's the whole point. There have been a number of different means or manners or reasons for using assessment. Some of them okay, some of them not so okay. And good teachers have done all of these things, including me, all right? Grades have been used as motivational tools, we know that, right? Low grades, theoretically, they don't, but they're supposed to be an incentive to improve. High grades are supposed to be motivation to continue efforts, theoretically. Grades as behavioral tools, right? If you're late, you're taking a couple points off. If you bring a can for the canned food drive, for the feather drive, 5 points right there, boom, to tack onto your grade, right? Grades as administrative tools, I think we've all done this. I'm not so critical of this. Like, for example, you might give a personality inventory at the beginning of your class and group kids by personality, or you might give them some sort of like a pre-benchmark, right? Here's what, I wanna know what you know before we start delivering the content. So you can get an idea of student level of background knowledge or their content mastery as they come into it, and you might be able to group them accordingly. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that as a, you know, an assessment use. But, and I'm not trying to like make an appeal to authority here at all, but if you've been in education, you know the name Robert Marzano. He's probably the only one that really focuses on assessment as, this is his school, right? I mean, he studies assessment. He's probably the most well-researched, most prolifically written educational scholar on the topic. That does not make him right, but I think he has a lot of things to say. This is the Green Book. I just call it the Green Book. It's the assessment Bible. You may have a copy. I've got like 100 of them. I've got several here. If you want to take one with you, you can have it. I will tell you, this is a very technical book. It's not going to be like great nighttime reading. It might be. If you're a nerd for assessment, you might. Tony might eat it up, man. He probably already has read it. But this is the definitive book on assessment. Now, it's a little dated, and I might have an update on that. I think they might have another edition. I've got folders of stuff that I'm going to put on the WWE, some more updated research. This particular presentation is I think the latest study I have on here is 2010. But this is a great, great resource. Not only is it theoretical, it talks about the Haddon-Temperley meta-analysis, the study of all studies on assessment that's ever been done. It also gives you some practical tools on how to set up a standards-based grading gradebook. We do that pretty well here within the parameters of our infrastructure power school. So it may not be as necessary, but you're free to have it. It's a fantastic book. It's very, very helpful. According to him, now, grades are feedback to the learner on the degree to which he or she has the knowledge and standards at a particular point in time. So a grade is supposed to be feedback at a given point in time. There is this idea, not by any of you or anybody at this school, but I remember this was said like, oh, this is supposed to make every kid pass. And assessment, if done properly, should assist in that because it is a learning tool, but standards-based grading is not meant to make everybody pass. It's supposed to give feedback. And if that kid at that given point in time is not or doesn't have content mastery, then that mark of progress towards content mastery should be accurate, or it should accurately reflect that. It's not supposed to push anybody along at all, okay? It's feedback of where a kid is at a given point in time to the kid and to the parents or the guardians, all right? So premise number one, here's a few premises. I think if you can knock down any of these premises, not that there's a need to, then you might have an argument, but I don't think that they can be knocked down, okay? Premise number one is that feedback is the most important factor in student achievement. Why do I say that? Well, the research proves that, or it points to that. Haddon-Temperley, the study of all studies. And by the way, it's not just like random feedback like attaboy, Neely, or a good job, or well done. It's Pointed, direct feedback, specific feedback on their areas of strength and their areas of deficiency. That is the greatest factor in improving student achievement. A kid needs to know where they're at and where they need to go, right? Premise number 2. This is Hattie, by the way. Hattie, of the Hattie and Timberley survey, the most powerful innovation that enhances achievement is feedback. The simplest prescription for improving education must be downloads of feedback. All right, premise number 2. The most important function of grading and assessment is to provide student with feedback regarding their progress towards content mastery. So feeding is the most important factor in student achievement. The most important function of grading is to give students that feedback related to content mastery, where they're at and where they're heading. Okay? Premise number 3. Again, we've all done it. We've all done it, and me included, okay? When other factors influence grade reporting, suddenly the only thing you can't communicate is content mastery. So when we add those extra points for timeliness, neatness, good behavior, good citizenship, cans to the food drive, when we take off points for lateness, not putting your name on the paper or whatever, suddenly we cloud the ability to accurately report content mastery. The one thing that the grade is supposed to do, then we can't do when we do that. I'm not saying not to hold kids accountable, by the way. There's an appropriate way to do that. It's just not with the grade. The grade's not the tool to do that with. What are some of the common defects in traditional practices, all right? First of all, most grading practices are assignment rather than standards focused. For example, okay? Now you've seen these before because I think I've used this same presentation with many of you before. If you look at that student right there, just look at that grade book, take a look at it for a minute and kind of give me an idea, and you can just speak out of what's going on with this kid.
You don't know what the standards are because it's not listed or addressed.
That's true. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, it's not. It's a bunch of stuff up there. Quizzes, homework, notebook checks, that kind of thing.
Probably no time to do homework because of home life, 2 zeros.
I'm gonna tell you right now, man. Last night, I have not had a chance. They send us these homework assignments to do. You get them, Tony. The thing like the reading checks, and you do 5. You're supposed to turn it on Friday. I haven't done it at all, not in the last 2 weeks, because I'm not getting home till 7 o'clock. And then Tanya's been busy with the musical, so I've got to bathe and feed. I'm not doing that, A lot of times kids are going home and taking care of kids, or they're going and being kids. They're going home and getting on the place for whatever reason. We got a kid here that's not doing homework.
Which is a reflection of their classwork.
Right.
At first it is, for sure. But look at what happens as the unit goes on.
Yeah, because the grade goes up.
Yeah, but they're still at 0 for homework.
He starts to get in a groove, right? And then when we get to the final unit test, great, game day, what's he get on it?
95.
95. What's he get in the unit?
Right, it's 66.
Why is that?
Is everything weighted the same? And take
It's
an
not.
average?
It's not standards based, it's all of those.
There are different weights.
Variables.
There are different weights. Like this is weighted once, this is weighted 3 times, this is weighted twice. So they do weight them differently. We can go into that too. But here's the picture I get when I see this. I see a kid who might have some home life issues. He's not the most industrious at home. He is making some effort in class, and maybe he didn't get it at first, but he starts to kind of catch on as the unit went on. And then by the time we get to the end, he's got it. He's arrived. But he's being held accountable for mistakes or deficiencies early on in the unit.
His practice did almost make perfect, but it doesn't reflect.
Doesn't reflect it, yeah.
So he's basically moving from a 2 to a 4.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if he's going up for his driving test, he gets his license. But
So what we tell students in our class in the pitch I make at the beginning of the year is we tend to think of learning as a linear process. I tell you information, you should automatically have it, but it's non-linear. It's more like a roller coaster than it is a slide.
Yep. Absolutely. Then we get to let's look at student 2. See, student 1 he starts slow but makes progress. By the end of the unit, he passes quizzes and starts to complete homework. Look at that, he got 100 down here. However, even though his unit test reflects mastery, his unit average does not, because this is an assignments-focused grade book, not a mastery-focused grade book. Then we get to student 2. Again, thinking of like learning as a linear thing. is that the case with this kid?
No.
He goes through the whole unit, right? And looks like he's probably got some support at home.
But his mastery scores aren't good.
He's not mastering it.
And that's
He's a
even
diligent
with
kid,
it
and there's something to be
times
said for
three.
diligence.
That's even with it times 3.
Yeah, even times 3, you know?
Well, and
Yeah.
to a certain extent, not being the devil's advocate here, but that, it's showing his mastery, but then there's all of his effort and,
Mm-hmm.
dependability,
Right.
which,
Very dependable
if you
kid.
notice though, there's nothing there below a 60, like what we do here, so that didn't harm him like that other students did
With the zeros, yeah. And that's a great point too about 60. I'm not really gonna go into 100-point scales in this. I would like to, but, I mean, to me, it's like 60 is not the end of the world. He's got over half the content. You know, if we're measuring this on a 100-point scale, whatever that
He's not a
means.
good test taker.
Not a good test taker.
That's always
So-
been my problem.
Or we just really don't know. We know that on game day, at the the standards mastery event, he did not display mastery, but his grade reflects something close to it. You know, there's a disparity here, there's a disconnect. Whereas with student 1, that kid met mastery, but his grade is definitely not reflective of that. It's reflective of a number of things, but definitely not mastery, okay? Or, and you've seen this one here, I've used this before, the parachute school analogy, the 2 students, right?
Yeah.
Which one you want packing your parachute? The obvious answer here is none of them,
For
right?
real.
But student A's got an 80, student B's got a 60, so if you had to pick one, you say, well, I'd rather have the 80 until you look, and you see that student A was remarkably consistent for the entire 10-week course, 4 out of 5, right? What's that, 80%? The whole time. 8 out of 10 chances you'll probably survive, but there's a 20% chance you won't.
Right, of course.
So he looks like he's an okay student. Then we get to student B. This reflects learning right here, right? He didn't know jack at first. Then he starts to get it. 3. By the time we get to the end of the course, the last 2 weeks, he's perfect.
Consistent.
You know, 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5 each time. So I definitely want him packing my chute, but the grade doesn't reflect that. So the grade masks things, it conceals things, it hides things that we can't see because they're not using, they're not grading with mastery in mind, they're grading with assignments in mind. All right. So in this case, like we mentioned earlier, the use of zeros was punitive and instructionally absurd. By the way, I have a whole folder, I'm gonna attach it to this thing. There aren't any studies defending the use of zeros out there. There are tons of them showing the adverse effect of using zeros. You don't have anybody out there saying, man, zeros work, right? Now, I will tell you, in our school, we don't really use them. We use them as placeholders. I'm not even real comfortable with that, but at least because we practice without penalty and we reassess, at least at any time, that zero is going away.
Yeah, that 0, the way I think about it is it's motivational because when a parent gets a message that your kid has a 0 in the gradebook for this test, they then send me a message and I'm like, I've been telling your kid for 3 weeks that they need to make up this assignment.
Yeah.
And they haven't. Mama sees the 0 and then she's getting on to him that night.
Correct.
So it's a motivational, it's not punitive.
Yeah, we're not. So we don't use zeros in the classical way that someone uses a 0. Here, you got a 0 on it, boom, and then you're moving along. We use them as placeholders, right? If you did use a 0 that way, though, you can see, I mean, how absurd it is. I don't think anybody, I don't know of anybody in our building that does this or that believes this or would even try to defend this. But I mean, you can just see, like on a simple, 5 temperature readings, one misreading just pollutes the whole data, right? This final mean has no reflection of reality at all. It's a complete outlier, 2 or 3 zeros, and we saw this with student 1, are sufficient to cause an entire course or unit failure. And consequences are supposed to be corrective in nature, whereas zeros are punitive, non-corrective, and nearly impossible to recover from, especially when you get 2 or 3 of them. It's mathematically absurd. I've got this letter, I've read this to you before. This came from years ago. This is an excerpt from a real letter. Names were changed, but you can see it there. My son has 11 B's and 2 zeros. His average is a 67.7. How's that fair? When 11 out of 13 is 85% on a scale that your handbook describes as above average, but he's failing. It doesn't make sense to me. Hopefully, if he's got good parents, they're putting that, boot to butts and getting them in, but in our case, we don't really have a lot of that, and in a lot of situations. We're faced with the irony that a policy that may be grounded in the belief of holding students accountable actually allows some students to escape accountability, when you think about that, right? So we're supposed to be holding students accountable, and we think that by giving them a 0, we've done that. Well, we've not. We just move along, right? They're then allowed to escape the work or the assignment. They're not accountability tools nor motivators. I'm not going to read a lot of quotes here, but I did want to read these in particular. 0 has an undeserved and devastating influence, so much so that no matter what the student does, the grade distorts the final grade as a true indicator of content mastery. And he says this mathematically and ethically and is unacceptable. I wouldn't go that far. By the way, all these studies are very dated. I don't have a study in this particular presentation beyond, I think, 2012, but I've got a folder that I'm putting on the dashboard that's got studies as recent as 2024 in there about that. You don't find a lot of defense of the use of 0s out there.
The data
in
probably
instruction.
hasn't changed though.
No, it's
Because
not. I mean, yeah. And no more than human nature has.
Right.
So, but he says it's unethical. I wouldn't say that, because teachers do what they know to do. Teachers we're parents, guys. We make mistakes, and a lot of times we're not thinking, critically about what we're doing, because there just aren't a lot of formal assessment. Maybe there are now, but I mean, when I was going through my preparation program, you didn't have like training on assessment. You had like methods and materials. You had like foundations. You had maybe some instructional classes, but nobody was thinking about assessment until really Marzano started writing on it, and challenging us to, consider what we're doing here. Is this really, now if you know and you're informed, it's like heresy, right? If you're an informed person and you believe this still in spite of all this background knowledge, you might be held accountable for that. If you're just a common layman in there and you're trying to do good, you make a minor theological aberration, that's different. The nature of heresy is different depending on your background knowledge and all that. That might even be controversial, but I think teachers are good. They do what they know to do. And a teacher sometimes assigns a 0. They're not trying to be unethical. They're just trying to, hey, you got a 0, you didn't do it. They think it's going to be motivational. And sadly, it's not. There's no study that shows it is. Despite evidence that grading as punishment does not work and the mathematical flaw in the use of 0s on a 100-point scale, I'm not going into that. Many teachers routinely make this policy in the mistaken belief that it will lead to improved student performance. Again, back to the ethical thing. If you know that it doesn't work and you still do it, maybe it's unethical. I think most people, it's just a mistaken assumption that I'm going to give you a 0. You do it, and again, the way we do it at Russell Middle is not that way. They're placeholders. They're really mechanical or procedural in nature. The way we assess that can change in a second once that student produces evidence. So they're not left to live with that. No studies support the use of low grades or marks as punishment. Instead of prompting greater effort, low grades more often cause students to withdraw. We can go on and on with these. Okay. These various defects in traditional practice has a common feature. In each, they make it difficult to accurately communicate content mastery. Remember, the grade is feedback. Feedback to the student. Specific feedback is what's helpful, and that's what a grade's supposed to do. But if we don't do that, what do we do? You can't beat something with nothing, as Cornelius Van Til would say. What's the alternative to that? What we use, standards-based grading or forensic assessment or whatever you want to call it. In SBG, remember, the feedback is nominal in nature. It's not numerical. Again, we're not spending a lot of time about the 100-point scale and its defects, because we do use that for standards mastery simply because that's what our architecture requires, Power School. That's the way the state of Georgia, especially at the high school level, reports to the university system. So we're not trying to reinvent everything and all that kind of stuff. There's a way to game that to make it work for us, which we do. But the point is, the feedback that we get is qualitative in nature. It's nominal. It's a symbol. It means something. And there are people that will even be uncomfortable with using a 4-point scale because we're still thinking in terms of numbers, right? 4 is like 4 greater than 0, and that's not what it means. I like the color scale. If you just describe, gold, silver, bronze, and red or whatever. But these are symbols. They mean pieces of information. Before the students achieve content mastery, they can teach it, right? 3, the students met the standard. 2, the students progressing toward the standard. And 1, the student is making no significant progress. And remember, the feedback's gotta be specific too. We talked about critical self-feedback. One thing that Jessie Lawrence and I used to do a lot, I know Hansford does it because I see it all the time in her room. And many of you have, I'm not in all of your rooms at the end of the period, and most of the time I'm coming in just for a few seconds to see kids. But at the end of the period, like Hansford will go and she will have the kids rate themselves against the learning target on a 4-point scale and explain why. And it's remarkable because the kids will be more critical of themselves than she would be. You know, she'll tell them and stuff. And so
Talk them out of giving a 1.
yeah, and she'll have these. She'll pull them up and have a conversation like, why did you do this? But you know this, right? So that you're at least a 2 here. But it's good because the kids are thinking about they're thinking about what they know, right? So it's specific feedback, which is the most powerful factor in student achievement, according to the
Definitely
Patty
helps build
Tippers.
confidence.
Yeah.
One of the things we were doing in our class today, actually, Dylan put together this great foldables folder project throughout the unit, and we're doing student self-assessment on the 4-point scale, and that's going to partner up with ours, and we were able to use it for instant feedback. It's like, okay, you have an hour in this class, you're grading yourself as a 2, you recognize why a 2 and you're identifying it, go fix it.
Yeah.
Like if you know that you're labeling yourself as a 2, then I'm probably gonna see the same thing, go fix it.
And what do they do when you tell them that?
Begrudgingly go back and fix it.
But I mean, of course, the idea is yes, go back and fix it
Yeah.
before you come and get the final grade
Yeah.
from us, which would be just what you're asking us to do, and then giving them the feedback.
And it's good that you're saying that. Go back and fix it. They
That's
know what
right.
it is they must fix.
That's
We
right.
do the
So-
same, we've got a rubric
That's
Yeah.
that they're having to grade themselves on for their written response.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, grudgingly, but at least if they are cognizant of, I know I need to improve and this is where I need to improve, it's a progress.
That's
Mhm.
right,
A process.
that's right,
Of
that's right,
growth.
that's right.
And we're just not seeing the end of it.
Well, from using it from the beginning of the year, I have a lot of positive gains and only very few negative gains. So like, if you're consistent with it, the kids do respond.
Yeah.
Some of the advantages to this, again, we're talking conceptually here. I think most of us have I had some slides in there that were about gradebook setup. We could spend a whole, I think most of us have, you've got your standards mastery grades and your formative assessments. Your formative assessments are non-weighted, but they're rated on a 4-point scale. And then your standards mastery is on a 100-point scale. Some of you gain that for those numbers to correlate somehow to the 4 points, and that's how you got it set up. But the point is, in each of those scenarios, those numbers are symbols that you can go back and use as conversation pieces with your kids to discuss their level of mastery to move them forward. What are the advantages of this? Since forensic assessment or standards-based grading accounts for student progress, students are free to practice without the fear of penalty, okay? Now, this is a hot topic here, practice without penalty. Some people have said, well, yeah, but penalty for no practice, which I understand what you're saying, but to me, that's a cop-out too. That's a way for you to loophole into moving kids along, ascribing a 0, and ultimately not holding them accountable. There are we've got such a great school, man. I'm so privileged to go in every day and see amazing instruction going on. I hardly ever go into, did it die? Oh, thank you. I hardly ever go into a room,
20%.
almost never, and see kids lined up in rows and columns being lectured to. I go into rooms and there's active learning. They might be on bean bags in the corner in Miss Ralston's room. Who knows what's going on in Hansford's room? Same thing with, Dimlich and Neely, man. It's always something. Kids are moving, they're collaborating and all that. When you're doing SBG properly, it should be inherently differentiated because kids are different and every kid's not gonna sit down and do the same paper and pencil task. They're not going to. But I had a conversation with Miss Curry about a particular student, and she's like, but I was like, well, you can't force him to. Now, if he's not disturbing anything and whatever, it's not necessarily a write-up type of thing. It could be. That could be evidence of like defiant behavior. I don't know. It's like I typically wouldn't write a kid up for not doing work unless they're being disruptive. But I would try to sit down and find another way to get my feedback because why? If I force that kid or if I attempt to force that kid to do something that they're not willing to do, is the feedback that I'm going to get going to be good anyway? Even on a formal assessment like a milestones test, what do they do? What do those kids do when they don't want to test? They log in and do what? Boom, 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 boom. We're talking about human beings here. with desperately wicked hearts. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if they're gonna be, if they don't wanna do it, another example, last night, we go to the trunk or treat, great, fantastic, people were complaining on social media, I don't know why. Oh, who do I call, it was so big, we didn't get into, I was like, dude, that's free. They did that for you, you didn't have to go, it's what mandatory, 3,000 people came through that last night, and it didn't end until 8:45.
That there is a wait to get in.
Yeah, there's a way to get in, sure, but don't come if you don't wanna wait, just wait for trick or treat, same thing with Camp Jordan. But it's like, you can't. But anyway, the point is, we went, and by the time when we left, I got home, Tanya was running a table, so she wasn't gonna get home till late. We get home, Petra's eating food all the way home, right? Candy, she's throwing it in. I'm not gonna stop her, it's Halloween, man, Well, we get home, I run the bath, get her cleaned up. What do you want for dinner? I want oodles and noodles, so we made her some ramen noodles. Set it down, nothing. She wasn't gonna eat it. And short of me like opening her mouth and forcing, I tried to get her, take a bite or two, she did. But she didn't eat it, she wasn't gonna eat it. That's, whatever. That's not gonna be the reason that she becomes famished and all that. So there are other ways to get your feedback. And there's a lot of talent in this room alone. There's a lot of talent across our building. You guys know how to do this, but it can be anything. I think we get fixated on, because our lesson plans are neat, and some of us are type A, I am also. I've got this thing, and it's nice and neat. It's cohesive. It runs, and I want everybody to do this instrument and all that. But kids just aren't. That's not human nature. I mean, you go to Fairland School, elementary school, and you go and you read like we do sometimes. We'll go up and read to them. You've probably seen this. Those kids will sit there, quiet, behave, and listen quietly till you read your story. If you could do the same thing at Rossville Elementary, those kids are active. They come up. They want to see the pictures. They touch you. It's just they're wired differently, So you've got to treat them in a way that's consistent with their nature, right? And every kid, it's not consistent with their nature to put a pen to their hand and write or do that written task. And it may be because they got a bad attitude. It may be because they're afraid, because they're not that smart. It may be just because they're not feeling it. But you've got to find, this is where your talent as an artist, as an instructional artist, not a scientist, comes in, as a parent, to find a way to get that feedback from them, all right? We could do a whole WWE on just that, techniques for motivating kids, But the point is, forensic assessment accounts for student progress because, one of the reasons, because they're able to practice without the fear of penalty. Another thing, I don't want to meander too much or go off but we got to get in the habit of celebrating failure too. A lot of kids, especially generational poverty kids, won't make an attempt because they're afraid to fail. They don't want to be embarrassed. That's a real thing in Title I schools. You guys see it all the time. Some won't go out for sports because they're afraid of failure. They don't want to be stigmatized. So they'll talk a big game, but they won't go out. We got to celebrate failure. I love to see like walls of fame in your classroom. Like, yeah, this kid failed, but it was freaking fantastic. I mean, this is what he did, And celebrate failures because that's how we learn. Making mistakes, trial and error, sometimes making just thoughtless mistakes. But hey, I would love to see us like destigmatize failure in our building. Like, dude, man, you got to see what so-and-so did, man. He said this, it was the funniest thing, but this is what he was thinking. And now we know that that's not how that works, or that kind of thing, But a wall of failure, I would love that, You got to do that properly. Don't demean somebody. You might have to deal with some parents and some fallout then, but we have to find a way to destigmatize failure. Since not all students will require the same number of practices or the same amount of evidence, forensic assessment is natural differentiation. It's inbuilt. It's kind of like WWE, right? No WWE is mandatory, not a one. I have asked that younger teachers come in because this is foundational to our practice and our philosophy at our school. But I'm not taking you might fill out a sign-in sheet because they have to provide evidence that we're doing professional learning to Robin samples, but I'm not taking note of that. I'll never look at that, ever. If you need it, come, right? If you don't, you don't. Not every kid needs the same assignment to demonstrate mastery, or that practice might not even be appropriate for where they're at. So again, that doesn't make anything easy. There might be 20 different things going in your room, and that makes for a hectic life. It does, but that's what we signed up for, right? You guys are professionals, and when you go to a hospital, you expect the best care. You're not concerned about what that means for, how much effort that doctor has to put into it. You expect the best care, and we're providing a product and a service to students, and so not every kid needs to do the same thing. Differentiate your assessment techniques and your feedback sources. This is when we rolled this out, and I have to admit, we rolled it out sloppy as a district. I would get these teachers that would be like, man, I don't have time to do anything anymore because I'm grading everything. I'm like, why? Why are you doing that? You shouldn't grade everything. Since forensic assessment is rooted in practice and evidence, you should be relieved of the burden to grade everything. You don't need to. You can go around and the kid can practice without you. Also, in your rooms, and you guys are active in your rooms, sometimes walking around and seeing what they're doing is sufficient enough evidence for you to understand where they're at. And if you're conferencing and engaging your kids, you know where they're at. You don't have to grade every little thing. You're gonna grade some stuff, why? Because they need feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to grade every little thing, and you don't have to grade everything in the same way, right? We're not preparing kids for the factory, right? We're giving them feedbacks to move them towards content mastery. So you should be unburdened by having to grade every little thing. Since forensic assessment is focused on content mastery rather than scorekeeping, it is much more objective. We'll get this because 100-point scale is traditional. We're comfortable with it. Everybody thinks, oh, that's objective, right? And 4-point scale or forensic assessment is subjective. I'm like, no, it's just the opposite. We've done this exercise. It was actually on this slideshow. I took it out for time, but where you give the test to a room full of teachers, right? 4 or 5 different categories of questions from multiple choice to short answer to essay, and you give them the scenario. This kid answered this many correctly in this section, this many in this one, and this many in this one. You weight the categories and you grade the test. And what happens in a room full of teachers?
It's all different.
It's all different, man. There is no inter-rater reliability at all because those weights reflect the values of the teacher, not content mastery. So you can have one test, and we've done it. You've been in the room when we've done it. You have too. So have you, just not you. Where that same test, you might have a 60 and you might have a 90. These are professionally trained educators grading the same test, but they've weighted it. So it just looks objective. It's a veneer of objectivity. The real objectivity is your expertise, right? Those kids are presenting you evidence, and the standard is your expertise. You're making a judgment every kid is judged by the expertise of the teacher. That is objective. That's objectivity right there. Clapbacks. What are the clapbacks? Yes, but if students refuse to work, how will they be held accountability? And I'm like, well, as though we rolled out standards-based grading, and on that day, students stopped working, right? Students have always not worked. Like my very first year, I never forget, I had some great kids, I'm still friends with them, great kids. They did not work. I hadn't even thought of standards-based grading yet. They just wouldn't do the work, right? It's not a problem. Accountability is not a problem with standards-based grading because we are mastery-focused, not assignments-focused. Being held accountable is a problem with traditional grading, where you're in a unit, you're moving along a unit map, you ascribe a 0, boom, and you move along. And that kid's let off the hook. He pays an academic consequence, but he probably would have anyway. He doesn't care. So, did I die?
10% left.
10%. The 4-point scale is not fair to students who work hard and complete all assignments. Doesn't matter to me because, listen, equality, I may jack up the saying here, but being equal is giving every kid the same shoes, the same pair of shoes, right? Fairness is giving every kid the same pair of shoes in the right size, right? Fairness is treating a kid how they need to be treated. It's not treating everybody the same. We're not dealing with fairness. Now, we do have a big fairness issue with traditional grading, but it's not standards-based grading, right? Fair is not treating all students the same. Fair is treating each student the way he or she needs to be treated. Students are different. Every student does not need to complete every assignment in order to demonstrate content mastery. Differentiate. That's all we preach is differentiation. That's not necessarily an SBG feature either. That should be found in any classroom, differentiation, which you guys do. Again, we've already dealt with the subjectivity thing. I'm not going to hammer that. Under the 4-point scale, students will have no incentive or motivation to work. Again, high-performing students are often intrinsically motivated regardless of the grading scale, and you don't have any. Now, there may be a research study out there. I'm not going to say there's no research out there, But the weight of research indicates that zeros don't motivate. They might demotivate, but they don't motivate. Under 4-point scale, students are rewarded for doing nothing. Actually, this is a concern with traditional grading, when you award points arbitrarily or take them away arbitrarily. What I mean by arbitrarily, for reasons that have nothing to do with content mastery. For neatness, citizenship, timeliness, bringing cans to the can, good thing or whatever, or taking them away for bad attitude, behavior, lack of effort, ascribing a 0 for no work, that kind of thing. So those are features of traditional grading, not standards-based grading. In forensic assessment, feedback is nominal. A student cannot possibly be awarded something for nothing. Again, going back to the misnomer that somehow, because we're doing SBG, everybody's supposed to pass. Not at all, they won't. In fact, you should get a more accurate indication of your students that aren't there if you're using SBG. You might get a conflated or inaccurate portrait of a kid that thinks they're there but's not, using the traditional approach. All right? Any questions? Again, assessment does not make you a good teacher, but I think really good critical teachers should be using it. If they know the nature of assessment, and if they know what they're supposed to be attempting to do, and the most effective way of achieving that, providing feedback, accurate feedback, to me, SBG, there's no good argument against it. So, any questions about that?
No, I just wish I had it when I was in school. I would have done better, because I just wasn't that Stanton.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't know the content, I just froze up when taking tests and things like that. But I did my homework, I do my projects, I would do my assignments in
I was
class.
overanalytical when it came to testing.
Ma'am?
I overanalyzed when I was testing.
We get these
You're
things.
trying to trick me.
I don't think Avid's teacher does this, but because we were hoping that they were all going to be in the same homeroom, but they're not, or the same class. So we had 2 of them were over there, Caden and Avid, right, are together, and then the other 3 are in one room. But our teacher's great. I'm not trying to criticize her, but she'll send home the color sheet at the end of the day, like they're on yellow, blue, green, or whatever. But I don't have no clue how to interpret that. Neither does Piper. Like, I'll ask, why are you on yellow? I don't know. I'm like, dang, man.
I'm thankful that David Cedar doesn't do that, because David, when he has run color systems before, got very neurotic.
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah. And you get, at first we were gung-ho about like this, but now I'm like, I don't even know what I'm getting onto her about. I want feedback for sure, but that is not Hattie and Timberly type feedback.
This isn't
That's,
a question, just a comment, because I was doing this, working on this particular thing this morning. Because we have a big assessment coming up, and even my rubric that I'm using, look, it's lends itself more to a 4-point scale. I've assigned points to one of them, but then the multiple choice part has 30 questions, and it's always a challenge, like, to figure out, okay, if they miss more than half, then they are not gonna pass. So I'm putting the number 15 as a 60, or I think it was like a 61 it ended up being. But, and then assigning those 100-point scales between 60 and 100 to the numbers 15 to 30 that correlate. I had to figure out, okay, every other one I have to two less points, 3 less points, because it ended up being like 2.66. So I do like a divide.
So if it's 30 questions and 15's your 2, and I would give that a 74. Then I would look at, half of 15's gonna be 7, but that would be 8.
That's kind of like
So
what
anything from 1 to 7 correct, I would give a 60. Anything from 8 to 15 correct, I would give a 74, because that's half. Anything from 16 to 22, I would give an 89, and then above 22, I'd give 100.
and I would say too, a couple things. One, there are different ways to cut this cake. There's nothing
Yeah.
sacred about a 4-point scale. It's just one way. I think what's sacred is that the feedback is nominal qualitative feedback. That's what's key. You can cut it up into any number of slices you want to. The other thing is, consider your assessment design. Like, and I forgot to bring this up. You've got it on your thing. These are kind of the distinctives, right? you identify the learning target. The learning target is rooted in the standard. It might not be the standard because especially in ELA, you're looping back to standards throughout the whole, you
Yeah,
know.
this is just circular.
Yeah, circular. So you said kids got to know what their learning target is for the day or for the unit. So what they're being assessed against. Then they practice that without penalty on a 4-point scale, right? Then you assess the learning target. Here's what we're getting to with what you just asked. We assess the learning targets with feedback given on a 100-point scale because we're using Power School, right? This is strictly a procedural thing, right? One, differentiate your assessments. Don't be married to the same assessment for every kid. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't ever give
They've
out the
got
same
three
test.
choices for what they're writing about.
Yeah.
Interest-based.
This is distinct from practice, so this is an assessment event. The kids know that this is game night. This is not a scrimmage. This is not a fall concert. This is festival. You're getting a grade on this. That's fine. And then you want to give them clear feedback on how to progress towards content master. Now, with your assessment, when you're designing your assessments, you might want to design your assessment so that it's easier to assess the level of mastery on the particular elements of that learning target, so that when you go back to reassess, like if that kid takes that test and gets a 69 on it or a 60, he doesn't need to go back and reassess the whole thing, right? Especially if you're able to go back and look and say, well, he's got these particular components of the standard. He's got that. I'm going to zero in on the areas of deficiency. So I'm just going to assess him on this. So that says a lot about how you build your instrument, you know. And then once they do that, once they've reassessed, after remediation, you're the one who controls that. A kid, you might have a gifted kid who's dying to get 100. They just want to come in and roll the dice and just try it again. That's not what we're trying to do here. You know, they've come back and they've remediated and they're ready to reassess on those areas of deficiency. You assess them on that. Then guess what they get? I mean, if they get that, then they get their content masters.
I've
So-
been, like, my reassessments, instead of like recreating something and then starting from ground zero, my reassessment's more of a remediation,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll add points to
Yeah.
the lower, just because with language arts, it is always like, you
Mhm.
know.
I mean, it's like, you know, when you go, this is very consistent with the real world too. I mean, Dr. Neely will tell you, I'm sure his experience was similar to mine. And I can't speak for everybody, but I know like in my doctoral programs, especially when you're writing a dissertation, you're reassessing the whole time. That whole experience is just reassessing. You're going back, they're sending it back to you, you're making adjustments, and then at the end of the day, you assess, but you defend it, and then you're a doctor, right? When you get your driver's license, I don't know if anybody in here has ever failed a driver's license test. You fail it, but you go back and take it. They don't average the two licenses together. You get a license. You get the mark of competence. You know, that you're a skilled driver, you know? So,
I think you only had to take the portion you failed. That's the only thing, because Lindsay did. And I think she had the written part, she had to just retake the portion she failed. She
Interesting.
didn't have, because it's.
we're taking Piper tomorrow for her learner's license.
Right, well, it
So-
was for the learner.
Yeah.
The driver, yeah, but
Yeah.
the learner,
So, but
yeah, it's like two portions.
I appreciate it, guys.
Oh, no,
Hopefully this was
appreciate
helpful.
Thank you.
So.
Enjoyed it.